Hello, ladies and gentlemen. You're welcome on this edition of Talking Point of your number one Pan-African channel for you Media Africa. Today, we seek to unravel problems affecting the African continent, and today we are discussing the DR Congo crisis. Of course, the tensions that are taking place in the eastern region of the Democratic Republic of Congo, and of course the escalating tensions it has had with Rwanda. Earlier this week, Rwanda's Foreign Minister Vincent Biruta and the European Union's Commission for International Partnerships held conversations in Brussels, Belgium capital, about the conflict in Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo, where hostilities between the government-led coalition and the M23 rebel group have escalated. According to the EU official Juta O.P. Lelen, they are committed to supporting the Nairobi peace process and finding a political solution to the crisis in the Eastern DRC. It's worth noting that the Congolese people on ground this morning at the borders between Rwanda and the Democratic Republic of Congo have suggested a return of the Tutsis back to the East African nation of Rwanda. But indeed, we did ask the question, could this result in more regional division amidst the various accusations weighing on the Rwanda? What are the stakes involved? And in the course of this edition, we shall be asking the question, what is really at stake with this recent meeting between the Foreign Minister of Rwanda and the European Union official? Ladies and gentlemen, join us as we unpack this in the course of today's edition of Talking Points. Stay with us. It's always a pleasure to be in your company, ladies and gentlemen. And today we are discussing in the course of today's edition of Talking Point something new, something that has been ongoing on the African continent. Indeed, it is the Democratic Republic of Congo, with the tensions that have seemed to escalate in recent times in that part of Africa. So in recent times, the Foreign Minister of Rwanda did meet in Belgium with the European Union official to discuss the ongoing crisis, while the EU officials suggested that a political solution was key to unlocking a peace, a resolution, of peace restoration in the African country. To talk on today's discussion, or today's topic of discussion rather, we have first of all with us here Mr. Engineer ELVIS BANEH, who is a political analyst, a national communications secretary for the Popular Actions Party, and he doubles as a human rights activist. Greetings to you, sir.
Good afternoon, Sharon. Good afternoon to all the viewers of For You TV. It's a pleasure being on your platform again.
We shall equally be joined by Dr. STANLEY FONGOD, who is a Pan-Africanist, and of course we'll be getting contributions from one expert on the ground in the person of CINAMULA, who will be taking part in his capacity as a human rights activist. To dive right in with you, Mr. Engineer ELVIS BANEH, first I'll say thank you for honoring today's invitation. We dive right into discussions. First of all, the first question I'll be asking you for today is, what is your analysis of the ongoing crisis that have been plaguing the Democratic Republic of Congo, and how could that impact regional stability?
Well, I think the crisis, I can simply say, it has overdue its stay, and it really doesn't speak well of Africans and of Africa as a continent. You know, they always say Africa is the cradle of humanity. They often say Africans are a hospitable people, but sometimes I am tempted as an individual, personally, that's a subjective view. Sometimes I am tempted to think that we have been and we were very much hospitable vis-a-vis the Westerners, the Europeans, who rather came here and enslaved our people, who came here and have come to stay and exploiting our continent and exploiting us as a people. But amongst us as Africans, we have never really been that hospitable, because when we look at the number of wars that we have across the African continent and those that persist, like the case of the RDC, I see it is really, really a sad situation given the number of decades that this war has lasted, and it looks like there are still no signs in the horizon of any possible solution in the days ahead. So I think if you are asking me what is my personal analysis, sincerely speaking, I say it's a sad situation. It is despicable. And talking about regional stability, there is certainly no stability we can talk about in an area, in a region, where not just one country is at war, but a couple of them all threatening each other. And of course, you know, there is that mutual distrust that has been reigning between the RDC, Uganda, Rwanda, around the area of the what we call the Great Lakes. So it's rather unfortunate.
It's rather unfortunate indeed. It's worth noting that the Democratic Republic of Congo is not the only country that is having tensions with the Rwandan Republic. We equally saw Burundi that in recent times decided to shut its borders with Rwanda as a result of accusing Rwanda of supporting the Red Tabara, the rebels that have been terrorizing the African nation. But let's get back to our topic of discussion. Rwanda's Foreign Minister Vincent Biruta recently held talks with the AU official. Now, this comes amidst several allegations of Rwanda supporting the M23 rebels that are causing havoc in the eastern region of the Democratic Republic of Congo. Now, amidst all this, how do you analyze this recent meeting between, say, the Rwandan official and the AU officials in the wake of the DRC crisis without any person or any representative that is on ground from the country that is facing the turmoil being present?
Well, the last part of your question says it all. I was about to begin from that perspective. If Rwanda has to sit and discuss RDC alongside EU representatives or alongside the EU, when there isn't any person from the RDC present down, then I think there is a serious problem. I don't know if Rwanda was mandated by the RDC to do that or how, I don't know. But you also understand that not only has the RDC constantly accused Rwanda of sponsoring the M23 rebels, but we know that sometimes in the past, and I think even till now, the EU has also outrightly indexed Rwanda as having a hand in the crisis in the RDC, as being the person sponsoring the M23 rebels. So maybe if they sat with the M23, if Rwanda is meeting the EU officials, probably it is in line with the accusations that even the EU has had to make against Rwanda, maybe as a way to try to persuade Rwanda to refrain, to refrain from their ways, to reconsider their ways, so that some sort of peace could reign in the region. But as an African, as a Pan-African, I still say I regret one thing: the fact that on our African continent, we some sort of create turmoil, we create problems, and at the end of the day, it looks like if the European powers are not the ones who come in to intervene to tell us what we need to, then as Africans, we can never have a solution. Because when we listen to the EU talking about looking for a possible political solution to the problem, I don't want to think that today in the 21st century, we need Europeans or the EU or the UN to tell our African leaders that when we have disagreements amongst us, be it with nations or within nations, we don't need them to be able to remind us that our political problems need political solutions. But when people begin to act as though they are sovereign states, as they will claim, but always need some sort of advice or counsel that comes from the Western world, then I think it is problematic, because we all know that the Western world will never come in to resolve any issue without their own interests being put on their table. Officially, they may not tell us that, but the truth is that they have an interest they will have to want to defend. And we all know, for instance, the RDC, we know what it represents or she represents in terms of natural resources of whatever magnitude you may want to think of. So it's rather unfortunate that we will always want to let the Western part, in fact, we directly or indirectly invite them into Africa to come in, and at the end of the day, we are the same people who end up being more exploited than ever before.
Thank you immensely for that contribution, which has got indications that Dr. Stanley FONGOD is with us. Greetings to you, sir. You're welcome on board.
Thank you so much, Sharon, for having me. I hope my connections hold up. I'm kind of on the road.
Okay, thank you so much for honoring the invitation. I'll dive right with you this time around. You've heard your co-panelists. Now, we're discussing Rwanda and, of course, the Democratic Republic of Congo's crisis. Now, with the recent visit or recent discussions between the Rwandan official, the foreign minister, and the representative of the European Union, what is at stake with this recent meeting? And, of course, the supposed political solution to ending the crisis in the DRC, and how would this impact the path to peace restoration?
If you look at what is actually happening in Rwanda, Rwanda will do whatever it takes to maintain its sovereignty. Rwanda will do whatever it takes to make sure that rebel groups that are quite interested in being able to topple the government in Rwanda do not cross over from the DRC into Rwanda. That's the first objective of the Rwandese. That's the first objective of Kagame. And so in that case, every single thing else will probably still needs to be hackled, discussed, and fought over in Rwanda. There is the talk about the M23. The reality is that there are more than 120 armed militia groups in the DRC, and we are not talking about those 120-something armed militia groups. And the only reason why we're not talking about them is because it's not politically expedient. The truth of the matter is that the DRC, like my co-panelists say, is disintegrating, and the reason for that is because of Western influence. The DRC, if you look at every single UN vehicle, I will say that, without any fear of repercussion, every single UN vehicle in the DRC is used for mining. Every single foreign expert that has been put in the DRC is a miner. Everyone who works in the DRC in the name of trying to be able to bring any kind of peace solution, whatever that peace solution, whatever it is that they are trying to be able to do in the DRC, is an expert in some form of mining. Everybody in the DRC have become a miner, and the truth of the matter is that bringing peace in the DRC or having conversations as to what is happening within those armed groups that are absolutely out to be able to topple, Rwanda and basically reign the level of chaos that's happening in the DRC in Rwanda, to me, it's just a farce. I think that the real conversation should be what's happening in the DRC. Let's take care of what's going on in the DRC. Let's talk about the Rwanda, the Congolese problem. And for us to start talking about that particular issue, we need to be able to focus about what is the force, the driving force to all of this. It's mining, it's minerals. There are big tech industries, tech companies around the world. Google, not Google, we're talking about Apple rather, and companies like Samsung and other tech companies that use microchip technology that are all in bed in what is happening in the DRC. The world is actually more involved in this than we can be able to point accusing fingers at Rwanda.
Exactly. You said it's all about looking at the root causes. It's all about looking what is pushing or what is causing or triggering the crisis in the Democratic Republic of Congo before solutions can be put on deck. Now, similarly, I'll stay with you, Dr. Stanley. Now, could Rwanda, who is bringing this crisis to the table, we know the tensions between the Democratic Republic of Congo and Rwanda in recent times, it's not been favorable. But for Rwanda to be able to go out and bring the crisis to the table, could this escalate or de-escalate the crisis?
I don't really know exactly what the world wants Rwanda to do. What do you want Rwanda to do? Rwanda is doing the exact same thing that someone like George Bush in America did. And so for the US to even remotely try to go to talk about Rwanda when they're doing the same thing, we call that here in the West preemptive strike. That simply means you look at where the enemy is and you go and fight the enemy on their home turf before they show up in your own homeland. Rwanda's objective, Kagame's objective, is to make sure that his sovereignty, the national sovereignty of the whole entire nation of Rwanda, is not compromised by armed militia groups that are living, operating, and working in partnership with Congolese military in Congo, in the DRC. So what possibly do you want Rwanda to do. There is no way in which Rwanda is going to allow these things at their doorsteps. They will fight this thing abroad. I think that the broader conversations over here should be the complexity of the DRC to be aligned this militia group, of even forming and with a more broader objective of gaining land and being able to topple the government of Kagame and basically destabilize Rwanda. Nobody wants to see Rwanda actually get destabilized, especially not now that Rwanda is absolutely doing well. It's become a model of a country in Africa, a model of leadership in Africa. So if we're going to start talking about what we need to do or what Kagame or what kind of solutions that need to be hacked out and who needs to be blamed for what, we all need to go back to the DRC. There are more than 120 different armed militia groups. There is just one that is out looking outside of Rwanda, looking outside of Congo, trying to topple Rwanda. And I think that Rwanda really, in the broader sense, is not the problem here. We should start talking about what's happening in the DRC. The DRC needs to look at the mirror. And if the DRC will look at the mirror, technically it's the world literally looking at the mirror and not even Rwanda.
Exactly. Now, it's often said that all these talks are not just for a peace resolution, but for it not to result in, tensions in the sub-region. Now, over to you, Mr. Engineer ELVIS BANEH. Now, what needs to be done for, this conflict or this crisis ongoing, for it not to, escalate into a regional crisis?
Well, for it not to escalate into a regional crisis for now, it is still, permit me stay, it is still some sort of an internal affair within the RDC. We know in recent times, President Tshisekedi has threatened to declare a war against Rwanda, something that has not yet happened. But we know that there are tensions that have been mounting between these two neighboring countries. And for it not to escalate and maybe become an international affair within the nations there, just like my co-panelist was saying, I think within the same RDC, it is important that the people start seeking political solutions to the problems that they face, first of all, within the RDC, the DRC, sorry, at the provincial levels, at the regional levels, even before we start thinking of the regional level, because the crisis will need to be handled at those three different levels. We have the provincials first, we have the regional that is still within the country before we go now at the regional. We're going to talk about the provincial, national, and then regional, sorry. When we get to the regional now, to me, it begins to, it concerns now the other countries, the RDC, you have from Rwanda, you have from Uganda, Burundi, all those countries around that area, you see, because it's all about them, concerned if it has to escalate. But now, what needs to be done? Just like Doctor was saying, it is true that Rwanda has been accused of, I think Rwanda and Uganda even, of backing the M23 rebels. It may be true. I always say it may, because as of now, people do accuse, but without any tangible proof so far. The EU has had to accuse Rwanda of backing the same M23 rebels. But like Dr. Riley said, we have so many other militia within the same RDC. I do not want to think that Rwanda is the same person sponsoring all these other different groups. So if the RDC could begin by maybe trying to resolve the issue within the country, find out politically what the problems are within their own country and try to resolve them, maybe if they could go as far as integrating some of the militia, or not even some, or even all, if possible, into their military. And at that time, we have just the M23 left as the only rebel group. Then we can now begin to face Rwanda, hoping that they are the ones therefore sponsoring the M23. But for as long as we have so many other different arms groups, which are not from far or near related to Rwanda, it means that we have many more other problems to be resolved within the RDC and not just an affair with the M23. So I think it should begin with the Congolese government trying to find out exactly what the root causes of their problems are within their country, and then they resolve them politically. Because we all know that most often than not, when when disagreements escalate into wars, into civil wars, it always begins from somewhere. It begins from a social malaise. It begins from a political issue that was poorly handled, and then it eventually escalates into an arms conflict. So I want to think that if the people are objective enough, it's just like the case we have today in the northwest and the southwest regions of Cameroon. If people are objective enough to sit down and look at the root causes, you will realize that these issues all begin either with social issues or political issues that could be handled from that perspective. And of course, there should be a certain degree of honesty. The stakeholders, all those who may have to sit around the table to talk, they must be honest to themselves to say the things the way they are and propose solutions that will be to the benefit of the entire country and, of course, the entire sub-region, and not just want to try to defend the interests of some particular politicians. Because we are talking today about the DRC that has been into turmoil for over 3 decades. But remember that this thing is all motivated by a handful of individuals in the name of politicians who have most often than not, an interest of theirs to protect, thereby preferring to let an entire country into a certain degree of turmoil.
Like Mr. Engineer Elvis BANEH rightly said, it's about understanding the root cause in a bid to look for solutions that could resolve the crisis. Now, back to you, Dr. Stanley. Now you've listened to what your co-panelists had to say. Could you make a comment on his contribution, while bearing in fact or answering the question, could dialogue or diplomacy be used to be able to tackle this crisis?
Well, I think the question is who is talking to who and why. So we need to be able to understand that who is talking to who and what is the reason for which they're even having the conversation in the first place. But the reality is we need to talk. There has to be dialogue. You know, he quoted the issues within the Southwest and the Northwest region. Those are very legitimate things, you know, within our own lifetime that we can actually be able to point to and say exactly how non-dialogue I can disintegrate to some of the worst human crises, you know, of our times. We have to be able to have conversations. We need to sit down on the table and actually talk about issues, and that absolutely credible and relevant, and do so with the element of truth. You know, there is something called truth. Right? Truth is so important that by the time we basically usurp the whole entire premise of truth, then we absolutely have no bearing, no tangent of what is credible. And if that was going to be true, the reality is that there is no solution that can absolutely be harsh. We have to be extremely careful to make sure that we enhance our lives, you know, and whatever it is that we're trying to do, even in the political scene or social scene, you know, with the element of truth. That's so powerful. Secondly, I'm not too sure how we can actually be able to handle the issue of the crisis that is brewing right now between Rwanda and the DRC if the DRC is not taking a lot of accountability for the crisis that is actually, you know, brewing in the region. We're talking as we speak on just, you know, I think recently it was basically one of the surface-to-air missile attack that actually took place, and a couple of soldiers got killed, and everybody's going crazy about it. Tens of thousands of people have died in the DRC as a result of the conflict, and all of this conflict is based on mining. Just so we have a clear understanding as what's going on, if you have 120 different armed militias, those you can actually just say you have 120 security guards, you know, arming 120 gigantic mines. That's exactly what's going on in the DRC. Every single armed militia group is actually, you know, interested in mining, and those are the armed groups that are actually defending those mines from other groups, you know, that will come in with AK-47s and try to get their loot from the country. So the clear-cut objective in terms of dialogue is this: we need to be able to talk about everybody else, whether it is the United States, whether it is, you know, the European Union, because so far as I'm concerned, Joe Biden is a minor in the DRC. Tony Blinken is a minor in the DRC. All of these groups, the EU, they are all minors in the DRC. China is a minor in the DRC. Russia is a minor in the DRC. The whole entire globe are minors in the DRC. So to target another African country like Rwanda and start talking about Rwanda as if to say Rwanda is the main problem in the DRC is actually, disingenuous. It makes no sense. It's crazy. That's basically madness. We need to look at what is going on in real time. And if we were going to do so, the world needs to be able to come to this table and say, we have to take a different approach, a different look as to what is happening so far as African natural resources are concerned, especially out of the DRC. But nobody's willing to say that because obviously that will mean talking about themselves, against themselves.
Now it's about looking for solutions. Now we shall welcome this contribution done for us by CINAMULA, who, like I mentioned in our preamble, is a human rights activist and a humanitarian philanthropist in the Democratic Republic of Congo. He made this excerpt, and here is what he had to say with regards to what's happening on the ground.
Il y a les problèmes, je sais que je disais le problème d'impérialisme toujours. Les Tutsis disent toujours que nous allons combattre, nous allons gagner la guerre. Nous allons gagner la guerre. Oui, ils vont gagner la guerre. Sur base de quoi ils vont gagner la guerre? Cette montée en puissance du M23 est due parce qu'il y a les Occidentaux qui sont derrière, et entre autres les États-Unis, la Grande-Bretagne, la communauté internationale entière et derrière les Rwandais. Pourquoi ils ne veulent pas dénoncer les Rwandais? Pourquoi ils ne veulent pas prendre des sanctions contre les Rwandais? La dernière fois, permettez-moi un peu de vous relater ce qui s'est passé la dernière fois. La fois passée, les M23 ont envoyé des bombes à l'aéroport de Goma, la capitale de la province du Nord Kivu, je m'excuse. Alors, analysons un peu. Si ce sont les FARDC, les forces armées de la République démocratique du Congo, qui auraient jeté les 2 bombes à l'aéroport de Kigali, quel sera le sort de la communauté internationale? Mais la communauté internationale va dire que non, la RDC a violé, la RDC a fait quoi, a fait ceci, a fait ceci, a fait... On va commencer à paniquer. Mais le tour du Rwanda, la communauté internationale n'a pas paniqué. À l'arrivée du président Emmanuel Macron en RDC, juste après qu'il est parti, une semaine dès qu'il est rentré en France, il a envoyé des chars de combat au Rwanda. Pourquoi il a envoyé des chars de combat? Il a envoyé des chars de combat au Rwanda pour soutenir le Rwanda à l'agression. C'est ça. La Pologne a envoyé ses militaires pour aider les Rwandais à combattre la RDC. C'est pour un peu comprendre, c'est un problème des Occidentaux. Les Occidentaux sont derrière les Rwandais. Mais nous allons chasser et les Rwandais et les Occidentaux. Et sera la chute de la communauté internationale. Et sera la chute de la puissance des Nations Unies. Si elles réfléchissent, si les Rwandais peuvent réfléchir et avec ses alliés, qui veulent se mettre ensemble pour nous combattre, gagner nos ressources naturelles, nous combattre pour récupérer nos portions de terre. Non. La France, la Grande-Bretagne, la Belgique, l'Angleterre, les États-Unis, ces ambassades doivent être chassées de la RDC d'abord. Comme petite solution, on doit chasser ces ambassadeurs dans notre pays. Après que nous les chassons, c'est déjà d'abord une voie de sortie. Parce que notre président de la République a passé à des pacifications diplomatiques, mais ça n'a pas tenu. Il a passé à des diplomaties pour un peu dénoncer les mal, mais l'Occident continue toujours à passer toujours derrière les Rwandais. Il ne veut pas prendre les sanctions contre les Rwandais. Pourquoi ne pas sanctionner les Rwandais? Combien de personnes que les Rwandais a tuées au Congo? Combien de personnes, combien des années où il y a meurtre en RDC causé tout par les Rwandais? Alors nous comprenons que c'est la communauté internationale qui fait ce que nous sommes aujourd'hui. Il y a l'adage congolaise qui dit qu'un chien n'est jamais monté sur l'arbre. C'est-à-dire il y a quelqu'un qui a fait monter les chiens sur l'arbre et c'est la communauté internationale qui fait monter les Rwandais en puissance comme ça. Les Rwandais n'ont pas la capacité de nous battre, nous non, et les Rwandais ne peuvent pas nous combattre. Mais parce qu'il y a la communauté internationale qui le trompe, il envoie des chars, des combats, des avions de chasse, tout ça, pour combattre les Rwandais, pour combattre la RDC. Et là, les Rwandais s'est dit qu'il est capable de nous combattre. Non, les Rwandais ne peuvent pas nous combattre. Et si les Rwandais peuvent oser de nous combattre, il va toujours subir les conséquences. Alors, je voudrais dire quoi dans ce sens que nous comme acteurs qui sont opérés, nous qui voyons comment se passe l'attaque, je pense que la communauté internationale doit cesser tout appui au M23, tout appui au Rwanda. Et si les Rwandais ne veulent pas retirer les terroristes M23 dans cette guerre, si les Rwandais ne veulent pas se retirer, la communauté internationale aussi ne veut pas, ok, nous allons passer à d'autres voies. Parce que les Rwandais ont des partenaires, comme le RDC aussi a des partenaires. La Pologne a appuyé les Rwandais. Nous avons aussi d'autres pays qui peuvent nous appuyer et monter en puissance et combattre l'ennemi. Dès que nous allons combattre l'ennemi, je pense que ce sera le sort du Rwanda pour subir les conséquences. Le Rwanda, c'est un petit pays, une petite région. Et il y a un territoire chez nous plus grand que le Rwanda. Mais parce qu'ils ont cet impérialisme, ils veulent monter aux épaules, dire que non, on ne peut pas faire quelque chose. Mais comme on voit des sorties qui est là, présentement d'abord, nous venons dans une période électorale.
Thank you immensely, Jacques CINAMULA, for your contribution on today's edition of the show. Now, I'll take it back to you, Dr. or Mr. Engineer ELVIS BANEH. Now you've listened to Jacques CINAMULA and his contribution. He says that the West has been fueling the M23 or supporting the M23 with regards to the attacks on the Democratic Republic of Congo. Now, how do you analyze this statement?
Remember, Madam, that at the beginning of this program, I asked a question. When Rwanda is meeting with EU officials to discuss the DRC, in the absence of the DRC, were they mandated by the DRC? It's a question. And my co-panelist made a brilliant analysis when he cited all the different countries that are mining within the same DRC. But like we say, this is a country that has been at war for over 3 decades. We cannot actually say that all these different world powers present in the DRC have not been able to get a solution to the problem. It means that we need to dig deeper to understand exactly what is happening. Just to give you an aside, take note that in the case of Mali, for instance, we know that France alone had over 5,000 troops in Mali, without counting the UN forces. So there were over 10 to 15,000 forces in foreign forces in Mali for more than 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 years. But the fight against terrorism kept increasing. It kept growing. The terrorists in Mali kept growing in numbers. And at the end of the day, what we discovered is just nothing but the fact that the forces that were there were actually there to mine the gold in Mali and send back to France and not to fight terrorism. And of course, coming back to the case of the DRC, I read somewhere that the EU is proposing something like they could get some neutral forces that they will send to the DRC. Be careful. The EU does not have any force of its own. And I want to think that even if we want to talk about the regional bloc that way, I wonder if they have the forces that it takes to send to the DRC. It means that at the end of the day, when the EU begins to propose an issue of what they call neutral forces, at the end of the day, they will still send their own troops into the DRC, but we know that what they send there as troops are in reality not troops. We have a few of them who are uniformed officers who will go there to secure certain areas and militarize them, while they actually on the ground have miners who are mining all the gold and the cobalt and all what you can find there and send it back to their various countries. So we simply need to dig deeper and understand what is happening. The DRC, that we have said, they should go back and get into the root causes of their problems within their country. Secondly, if at all the AU has a voice, they should help the DRC to see how they can start trying to, should I say, look into the nooks and crannies of this issue and send away, should I say, diplomatically look for a means to keep aside all the foreign countries that are doing mining in that country. Because the truth is that for as long as the DRC remains a lucrative country for them, a source of raw material for them, for their companies back in their respective countries, they will ensure that that country remains in war while they take it as they profit by that war to continue mining. Because like I say, we have seen it in places like Niger, we have seen it in Mali and in other areas, we have seen it in Burkina Faso. And today we see the consequences with the new military leaders that are coming up in those different parts of Africa. So I think the DRC needs to be very, very careful. And presidents like Tshisekedi, they should sometimes be very, very, not be too sharp at just accusing Rwanda for whatever thing they say Rwanda may be doing. It's true, I say, Rwanda may be behind the M23 rebels, but perhaps with other motives. But then what about all the other militia? What explains that within just one country and within just a region of that country, the eastern regions of the DRC, we should have so many different arms groups in that part of the country? What is the interest in that zone? Who therefore is sponsoring all the other groups if Rwanda is just behind the M23? So what about the other militia? So I think that there is much to this issue than just Rwanda and the M23. Let all the other European countries that are there, perhaps to me, be sent off just like we have seen them with France being sent off in Mali, in Burkina Faso. Let these other people take a break out of the DRC, and then the DRC takes now upon itself to reorganize its country, reconcile the Congolese among themselves, like I earlier mentioned, at the regional levels, at the provincial levels, at the national levels, and then before getting to the regional levels, and we see if maybe that would not be the beginning to some solutions coming into that country.
Exactly, it's all about solutions. And now we're gradually coming to the end of today's edition of Talking Point via Pan-African channel for you Media Africa. Now, direct this question to you, Dr. Stanley. Now, following these recent attacks, like your co-panelists mentioned, the eastern part of the Democratic Republic of Congo say the DRC has a lot of militias that are troubling the country, but what accounts for all this? In a bit to ask this last question, now following this recent increase in attacks coming all the way from the M23 rebels and others in the sub-region or in the eastern region of the Democratic Republic of Congo, in your opinion, what is the way out of this security impasse?
Well, I think that the world needs to literally come to the table and then we start having conversations that are meaningful, especially when you look at a place like Goma, and Goma is the de facto capital of the world, so far as I'm concerned. Everything is taking place in Goma. Goma has become a place where the whole entire world converged to loot the continent and to loot the DRC. My co-panelists said it so brilliantly and so eloquently as to what is happening in the DRC. You cannot be able to talk about the DRC if you are not talking about the world. You cannot be able to talk about the DRC if America is not involved, if Europe is not involved. It's everybody. Everybody has come to this gigantic table, a buffet table, which is the DRC, and they're looting it as much as they can. You have UN trucks that are loaded with minerals, that are loaded with natural resources as they take them out of the country. Cobalt, you're looking at gold, United Nations trucks. So what are we even talking about? If we are talking about and by the way, what a joke in the name of AU. The AU is, look, we need to scrap the AU, you know what I'm saying? And the only way to scrap the AU is to sanitize the members that are actually part of the AU in the first place. Because no matter what you change, you can change the AU, you can change the structure, but as long as you have these armed robbers, which are basically called presidents, that will come and still form that body, it makes no difference. It's still as hellish as it has always been. We need to be able to restructure, you know, the continent, and I think that maybe the DRC will tell us a little bit as to who we are. Let's reform our individual nations and have people who are Pan-Africans, people who will literally look at Africa with Africans' intent. And then let's now be able to create an AU that will reflect the culture and the consciousness of the African. And let us also be able to have a legitimate dialogue as to what is happening in the DRC. If all the mining activities stop in the DRC, no AK-47 will sound. If all the mining activities was to be suspended in the DRC, there will be no conflict, there will be no war. That part of the world will be at peace. As long as we continue to fund and to mine the DRC, that's when we're going to have legitimate problems. So for me, I think that that's where we start, and that's the solution, going forward. We need to be able to have legitimate conversations with the stakeholders that are involved in the mining process in the DRC. If they are not held accountable, then change will never come.
Everybody must be held accountable for their actions, and of course dialogue is the way forward. Thank you immensely, Dr. Stanley FONGOD, for your contribution on today's edition of the show.
Thank you very much. I appreciate you for having me. Thank you.
I will call say thank you for your contribution, Mr. ELVIS BANEH, for your impactful contribution on today's edition of Talking Point.
It's been a pleasure, madam.
We would equally acknowledge the contribution of Jacques CINAMULA, who was joining us all the way from the DRC. Ladies and gentlemen, it's on that note that we draw down the curtains of today's edition of Talking Point over For You Media Africa. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening, and do stay in company of our programs on For You Media Africa, your Pan-African television, another view of the world.